All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating piece of legal history, the landmark 1986 Supreme Court case, Mary Roy v. State of Kerala. This is a case that fundamentally altered the inheritance landscape for the Syrian Christian community in Kerala, striking a massive blow against archaic, gender-biased regional laws in favor of a uniform national standard of equality. If you're a student of constitutional or family law, this is an absolute must-know case, so let's get right into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to hit the facts that spark the dispute, the core legal issues, the specific rules and statutes at play, the arguments from both sides, the court's actual reasoning, and finally, the final judgment.
Starting off with Section 1, the facts. Basically, a dispute over inheritance. We begin with Mary Roy, a Syrian Christian widow and educator. In 1960, her father, P.V. Isaac, passed away intestate, meaning he left no will. As you can see on the timeline we've put together here, this case spans exactly 70 years of legal history. It kicks off with a highly restrictive regional law passed in 1916, moves to a National Integration Act in 1951, hits the catalyst with P.V. Isaac dying intestate in 1960, and finally culminates in the Supreme Court judgment in 1986. Having this visual chronology really helps lock in the sequence of events.
So, right after her father's death, Mary found herself in this incredibly bitter and humiliating dispute. Her brothers basically started harassing her, demanding she leave their father's cottage in Udi. They actually claimed she was in illegal possession of the property. Why? Well, they argued they were the sole legal heirs under this highly discriminatory regional law from back in the day, the 1916 Travancore Christian Succession Act.
And here is where it gets kind of shocking. Under Section 28 of that 1916 Act, a daughter's right to inheritance wasn't just limited, it was severely restricted. She was only entitled to 1/4 of the value of a son's share, or, get this, a flat 5,000 rupees, whichever was less. I mean, think about that for a second. Her absolute maximum possible inheritance from her father's entire estate was arbitrarily capped at just 5,000 rupees. But wait, it gets worse. The law had this massive catch. If a daughter had been promised or provided with stridhanam, which essentially translates to dowry, she completely lost even that tiny 5,000 rupee claim, stripped of it completely. Because of this loophole, Mary Roy's brothers felt they were completely legally justified in just pushing her out of the estate. Moving on to Section 2, the legal issues, specifically 2 critical questions the court had to answer. So the Supreme Court had to figure out 2 main things. First up, did this archaic 1916 local law even survive the region's integration into the broader Republic of India? And number 2, if it did somehow survive, were its glaringly gender-biased provisions unconstitutional under Articles 14 and 15?
That brings us to Section 3, Rules and Statutes. Let's look at the legal framework.
For you law students watching, this table lays it out crystal clear. To really grasp the mechanics of this case, we're looking at a collision of 3 different statutes. First, you have the discriminatory 1916 Travancore Act, which was a regional personal law. Then you've got the Indian Succession Act of 1925, which is a national law that actually provided for equal property distribution. And finally, the Part B States Act of 1951. Parliament passed this one specifically to extend central laws to formerly autonomous states, like Travancore Cochin. On top of those statutes, the constitutional framework here heavily relied on Articles 14, 15, and 32. As a quick refresher, these guarantee equality before the law, strictly prohibit discrimination based on religion or sex, and provide the legal remedies to actually enforce those rights. Basically, Mary Roy used Article 32 to argue that her rights under Articles 14 and 15 were being directly violated by that old 1916 statute.
All right, Section 4, Arguments of the Parties. Let's look at this clash of ideals.
The arguments here represent a massive divide, and we've laid them out side by side for you to read. Mary Roy's team essentially argued that a law giving daughters a mere pittance while sons take the lion's share is just a total affront to human dignity and constitutional equality. Plus, they made the really bold claim that the 1951 Act had actually already repealed the 1916 Act anyway. On the flip side, the respondents doubled down on tradition. They argued that personal laws are deeply rooted in religious practices. But their really big point? They warned of absolute practical chaos. They argued that changing the law retroactively would completely unsettle 35 years of property sales, mortgages, the whole shebang. Now for the really clever part, Section 5,
reasoning of the court, and their surgical statutory interpretation.
Now, you'd probably expect the court to just slam the gavel, cite the Constitution, and declare the 1916 Act unconstitutional right then and there, based on gender discrimination. But Chief Justice Bhagwati took a super methodical, almost surgical approach. Instead of leaning purely on the Constitution to strike down the obvious bias, he zeroed in on a brilliant, highly technical application of statutory interpretation and legislative repeal. Check out these 3 steps on the screen. They outline the court's undeniable logic perfectly. Step 1. The 1951 Act explicitly extended the Uniform National 1925 Indian Succession Act to the Travancore region. Step 2. When Parliament did this, they very deliberately chose not to include a saving clause to protect any existing local laws. So, Step 3. Because a central law was extended to cover a legal space that was already occupied by an inconsistent local law, boom, that older local law was impliedly repealed, just like that.
And this leads us to a pretty incredible realization. The court basically said, hey, it's not even necessary to examine the Article 14 constitutional validity. Why? Because the 1916 Act had literally ceased to exist on April 1, 1951. It was a ghost law. This discriminatory law wasn't just unconstitutional in spirit, it had been legally dead for 35 years before Mary Roy even brought her case to the court.
Let's bring it home with Section 6, the final judgment. A major victory for gender justice. So the Supreme Court formally ruled in favor of Mary Roy, and the ripple effects were absolutely massive. The 1925 Indian Succession Act was officially declared the governing law for all Christians in Kerala. This meant daughters were unequivocally, legally entitled to an equal share of their father's property. And crucially, this repeal is made retroactive all the way back to 1951. Now, to avoid that total chaos the respondents warned about, the court did exclude properties that had already been formally settled by final court decrees. But other than that, the legal foundation for 35 years of gender-biased inheritance was completely wiped out.
This incredible outcome solidified a truly vital principle in Indian jurisprudence. It proved, once and for all, that the uniform, equal laws of a democratic republic will always override archaic, discriminatory regional traditions. It really stands today as an absolute cornerstone for gender justice.